Welcome to the latest episode of the Fragmented Forecourts. This is a show that exposes the hidden complexities of fuel retail and the pressure of running an estate held together by legacy systems, fragile hardware, and vendor promises. Today's episode, Building a Unified Payments Estate, digs into why modernising feels risky and where retailers should actually begin. We're joined by Accenture's Chris Dickey. He spent a decade inside fuel and convenience payments, and as always, Victor Padee, CRO at Aevi, who's helped transform in-person payments around the world. So let's dig into it.
For people that might not know you yet, why should they listen to your views on payments?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've had the opportunity to work on payment challenges across all major industries. So I've seen the way high-tech industries are approaching payments. I've seen the way traditional acquirers are approaching payments. I've worked with the emerging disruptive players. So I'd say at this point, I've seen it all and done it all for the most part, right? There are some exceptions, maybe some blank space there. So I won't claim to be, the expert of all experts, but I do believe that I have a pretty good grounding in payments knowledge at this point. And fuel and convenience retail is a really personal interest area of mine due to the fact that the experience is really the same as it was when I was a kid, right? Helping my parents fuel up. We still do the same motions. We still go through the same place. And the big innovation over the past decades has really been the ability to pay at pump instead of going into the store. And that's really where the innovation stopped. And so to me, this is an industry really waiting for its Uber moment, the moment where we say, this is really, why did we ever do it that way? Why are we still taking these 5 or 6 steps we take when we go to the fuel retailer, right? With Uber, I do believe payments will be a key part of that, and excited to talk about that today with you.
You mentioned the experience hasn't changed much in fuel and convenience, and you mentioned the 5 and 6 steps. It all feels very fragmented, right? So why has fragmentation become the accepted norm in fuel? And from your perspective, what's the real cost of maintaining a fractured estate?
Yeah. First of all, I don't think people appreciate just how complex this business is, right? They have multiple types of customers. You have your consumers, you have your fleet drivers, you have truckers, others, right? You have the local gas station near me services the car dealerships who need to fill up their cars, right? You have multiple channels, right? You have the forecourt and the gas pumps, and we're going to talk about the forecourt in a minute. You have the car wash, the vacuums, you have in-store, you have EV chargers now, you have mobile apps. Increasingly, you also have delivery options, etc. And you're selling a wide range of products and services. You're selling fuel, you're selling car washes, you're selling made-to-order foods, you're selling grocery. In some cases, you're selling beer and wine and cigarettes. In some cases, you're selling gift cards. So just a complex business. And you're doing this at thousands and thousands of sites, operating under different ownership models. So like many other complex businesses, you don't always have the full control to say, I want that technology in that place. And so that complexity translates through to the technology stack. The key term for me, when you talk about any type of modernization in fuel retail, is this forecourt. And I mentioned it a second ago. That's the industry term for the area in front of the store where the gas pumps are, right? And so the forecourt technology is this famous, complex mix of specialized physical hardware and software. Includes the forecourt controller, the site controller, the electronic payment switch, and more. And this is all hardwired together, running through all of this network of cables and fuel lines and electricity and all these other things. And it has to be online 24/7 across thousands of sites. It needs to be networked to the rest of the site so you can turn on car wash from the pump or turn on pumps from the POS. And it needs to be hardened to operate outdoors in all weather. That's a pretty big ask. If you want to appreciate the complexity, if you recall, after Apple Pay came out in 2014, we saw many fuel retailers really start to promote, you can tap at our site, right? The reality was it was 5 to 10 years before many of those sites actually had that capability, and some still don't have it. Some fuel retailers are still operating with swipe cards and no tap to pay. So it's just been a massive lift there. And this is among the most complicated of businesses from both its scale and complexity point of view. You ask about cost. So it's a tough thing to answer, right? I'd say the main cost is really innovation, right? The ability to keep that experience the same, like we talked about, right? The cost of making any one change is really a large transformation cost over multiple years and potentially billions of dollars. But there's also the cost of downtime. I just had an incident this weekend where I went to try to go to a site and it was down. No signage, no anything. I pull in, several other people pulling in, no idea what was wrong, nobody in the building. So no one to ask. You just have to pull away and you lost that customer. And I might not go back again now because I've had that experience. You have the operations costs, these specialized teams that have to deploy to fix that issue, right? Because it could be anywhere in that value chain that those things are happening, right? It could be in the wire, it could be in the payment terminals, it could be above site, it could be at the corporate level, et cetera, or it could be a vendor issue. I've heard incidents of brands losing MasterCard for a full day because of some issue, right? And that's a huge amount of effort required to diagnose and translate that. I think that's just a fraction of the cost we're talking about here.
Great. Sounds extremely complex. There's a lot of different moving parts. On the kind of more of a flip side, what would you say are the biggest opportunities that fuel retailers are missing because of the payments, loyalty, data, or maybe some of the connectivity lacking at the moment?
Yeah, the statistic I've heard is that fuel and convenience retailers are unable to identify customers at 60% of visits. And that's despite a huge investment in loyalty programs over the past few years. In the US, at most major fuel retailers, you can save 10 cents a gallon just by signing up for a no-cost loyalty program. And yet, a huge, maybe the majority of customers are not actually doing that, right? That's a lot of unidentified customers that you're unable to really understand what they're doing, how their day looks like, all of the things we are seeing trends elsewhere, right? Personalization we see with Starbucks or with QSR, who's always giving me a push notification to go do some action. Can't do that if I don't know who my customers are. And I would say the problem's a little bit compounded here too, because even if they have identified the customer at the pump, I wanted to save my 10 cents. So I entered my loyalty number and I pumped my gas. Then I went inside the store and I bought a sandwich. I didn't enter my loyalty number in the store because I didn't need to. I wasn't going to save anything. So why would I do that? So now you don't even know the full level of interaction the customer is making, right? They've really shortcutted their ability to differentiate that customer experience and reduce the friction and to really understand what their customers are doing. I almost say that it's hard for me to answer this question because I don't feel like we're even at the baseline level to be able to think about those opportunities.
I guess it's quite interesting because what we see, why I see personally, why some of the teams or payment teams come to us, especially within the convenience fuel, is that their payment stack specifically is built from so many different elements and they don't talk to each other. So introducing loyalty seems almost impossible because you've got 10 different systems and they just don't communicate. With pump doesn't communicate with the kiosk, or kiosk doesn't communicate with the car wash. So creating this, I've been in payments for now 20 years, and the unified commerce or omni-channel is something that is first branded in 2015, 2014. And nobody really solved it very well because I think technically, or the technical level was very difficult to do. But that's the only way, the way I see it, to provide this unified experience across the one estate.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to what I spoke about earlier, which is the complexity of channels, which you mentioned, right? And the complexity of ownership models, right? Because even if you are able to do omni-channel across the channels, are you able to do omni-channel across sites? Because the site 2 miles down the road might be owned by a completely different group than the site that's a corporate owned one right here, right? And so I have control over that corporate one. I have to sell my payment solution, my omni-channel solution to that franchise or other ownership group. And that just multiplies the complexity here. So completely agree with that.
Hey, Chris, quick one on this, because I'm intrigued from the consumer lens, and you've probably done more work on this at Accenture and in previous roles as well. And Victor, you too, I would have thought. Why is the loyalty stuff so important from a consumer perspective? So I'm relatively new into payments. I know when I go and fuel my car, I basically just choose the closest station. I don't even look at the pricing at the fuel pump. I just pick convenience. What are the things that loyalty can give to fuel retailers that can help drive more business? What are the practical use cases that you two have seen?
The core is really the ability to identify those customers. That's what they're all after, right? Is the ability to say, I know who's purchasing from me. I know your habits, Nathan. Without you entering your loyalty number, I don't have a way of understanding the habits you just described. I don't know that about you. That's super, super important. The motivation of the actual fuel retailer. The motivation of the consumer is always to save money. And while you may not be a price sensitive shopper, a lot of customers absolutely are. And we've seen fuel retailers in the US at least start to provide price information into mapping software too. So you see when I'm going through my map, when I'm pulling up, where's the closest fuel station to me? It might also say, okay, this is the price of fuel at each of these. So we definitely see a huge amount of competition to save even those cents, right? And so, that price sensitivity is really important. There's also offers and promotions that come along with that. If you fuel up today, you get free coffee, those types of programs, which are also attractive. But really, we do see in America in particular, we see a lot of, we've obviously had this return to office trend. I'm sure everyone's familiar with. A lot of people are driving a lot of miles every day. There's no reimbursement for that type of solution here. So you're really spending money out of your pocket and you want to minimize that. So you're really very price sensitive there. And the offers are just cherry on top. If I do have an offer for a sandwich, I might go to that fuel retailer, which is slightly outside of my way because I get the free coffee or the free sandwich. And, that's all fuel retailers investing in trying to make those loyalty programs better.
It's a good question, Nathan. I think, maybe part of the reason why you just are not really bothered about where you're shopping is because you don't get the right experience. So the experience doesn't matter for you. But imagine if, let's say, you go to the pump and you pay at the pump, you then go to the coffee inside the petrol station and somebody says, oh, we've noticed you spend £100, $100 on petrol. There's a 10% off the coffee. Or you could get extra coffee or discount on any purchases. That would probably make you think, oh, actually, I could drive to that petrol station, to that forecourt, even if it's not as close to me. But also part of all of this and having connected estate is understanding customer behaviors and having a specific messaging that is tailor-made to you specifically. So imagine if you received a message from your local fuel provider saying, today we've got extra coffee. We know that you like to drink coffee. You could, if you fuel for £50, $50, you will get a free coffee. Having those sort of this data will enable you to have a stronger relation with the customer.
I think you're right. And when you were both talking there, the thing that came to my mind was exactly that. Like fuel retailers should be fighting for experience versus the standard. And that's why my decision is so cut and dry, because there is no experience wherever we go. Whichever fuel retailer I choose, I stand at a pump, I fuel up, I walk in, I pay, I disappear. And so nothing changes. There is no incentive. So with that in mind, and Chris, I'll put this one to you first. If you did fast forward 5 years, what does a fully connected forecourt look like, and how does payments help to unlock that?
I really like this question. For me, I think we've seen a vision of that future from most major electric car manufacturers. When I plan my trip, and I think there's a big question, do all of us use navigation apps all the time? So I do think a lot of this continues to be built around this idea that my mobile phone, my navigation app of choice is really a centric part of my life. But if I think about when I plan a trip, my car shares telemetrics with my navigation app in order to seamlessly blend refueling with trip logistics, right? And in the EV charging world, that looks like my car knows that I need to get a charger, I need to hit a charger 200 miles in, and it plans that accordingly, routes you there. We haven't seen that same translation with gas yet, but I do believe it will increasingly come as we see that integration. There was a recent announcement from the state of North Carolina's tolling agency that they built a app onto a Volvo car interface that was built on Google software in order to do tolling via the car directly. That's a great example of the car software being an integral part of the kind of mobile phone or app experience, right? In this case, it's shortcutting past the mobile phone connected into the car. It's really directly interfacing with the merchant. In this case, that I think we could see a vision of both futures, and that increasingly means that the telemetrics from that car are flowing through to the merchant, right? So I really know where my customer is and a little bit about them, right? And so I can automatically identify them, right? I really see that blend of data sharing, automatic data sharing. So as soon as I pull or I'm 5 minutes away from that fuel retailer, it knows that I'm there. It reserves a spot for me. It maybe prepares my made to order food so that I can deliver it to the pump, et cetera. And I think that's just the today future. The increased use of AI, I believe, will give us increasingly personalized routing. Oh, Nathan, I noticed you always take the back roads. It's always going to route you that way. It prefers you do that. You don't like highways. My individual driving styles, I always drive a certain amount over the speed limit. So it's going to take that into account when it actually plans my route time. My preferences, right? I really like to stop every 3 hours to stretch my legs. So I like a grassy area, or I really like the bathrooms at one of these places. It knows I always stop at a certain brand. So it's really going to start to learn and get more personalized to be able to give that experience to you. And I think a fuel retailer could be a very strong participant in that ecosystem. And right now, when I'm driving, at least, I have this situation. I want to get fuel. I now press the search button on my dash. It says, okay, what do you want? I try to clumsily type in fuel in whatever way I'm allowed to legally do it, right? Ideally, I have a co-driver who can help me do it. And it says, okay, I will route you to some fuel station. And sometimes that's 20 miles behind me. Sometimes that's 20 miles in front of me. Rarely is it what I want, right? But I can imagine with AI, we're going to see increasingly a bathroom brake button, a food brake button, a gas brake button, right? Where it really routes you to a location that best matches your personal preferences and minimizes disruption to your trip, which is really the holy grail here, right? And fuel and convenience retailers offer all of those things, right? So they are perfect ecosystem participant here.
I guess I'm probably a little bit, either my expectations are slightly less, or maybe I'm a little bit less optimistic. But and I love your take on the use of AI there, Chris. But my experience of fueling up, I would like for the systems to actually work properly. I often go to a petrol station and then you can't pay at pump. You have to go inside. It might be in a rush. I would love to just turn up at the station and pay at the pump and then just leave without having to go into kiosk. Especially in the UK, it's raining all the time. You don't want to be dashing from the pump to inside. If you want to use car wash, if you want to maybe change the tire pressure, pump up tire pressure in your car, again, it's a different system. Some of them are still coin operated. I'd like to see use of cards or mobile payments. Ideally, I would like to be in a situation where, similar to Amazon stores to do a trialing, that you just turn up with your car. You don't even have to maybe present a car but the card or phone once, and then after going into the shop using car wash, getting the petrol in, you're going to present it with a final amount instead of doing it 3, 4, 5 times in a fragmented way. But yeah, I'm with you, Chris, in terms of trying to look for some petrol stations, service stations. I've got 2 young kids and we were traveling last week and it was 200 miles journey, and looking for service stations on a map was an absolute atrocious experience. And that becomes quite challenging when you've got 2 little ones shouting in the back saying that they need a bathroom break.
Yeah. What's the resistance? You said something really interesting, Chris, that piqued my attention. You talked about going to a fuel forecourt, about to refuel. You get there and there's a 10-car queue deep, and you sat there thinking, oh, please no. Your kids are screaming in the back. You've traveled 10, 15 minutes to get there. It's just annoying. Is there enough appetite from fuel retailers to invest to actually solve these problems?
Absolutely. And I think we've seen In Europe, for sure, we've seen programs where they do register your car with pay by plate and things like that, where they can read your license plate, et cetera. In the US, we're restricted from doing that because we aren't able to read license plates in many states unless you have certain permissions. But yes, absolutely, both from fuel retailers, from QSRs with drive-throughs, there's a huge appetite from the actual merchants to be able to understand where their customers are. The example I love is in certain fast food apps, it will, when you're ordering it will say, keep this app open while you're driving. And what they'll do is they'll say, okay, I see from this app that you're now within a 5-mile radius of our store. We know you're headed to pick up your food. We're going to start preparing your food. So that way they make sure that they're getting as close to a match to the demand and supply as they absolutely can. We are seeing that level of innovation right now. Again, it's built around that mobile phone plugging into your car ecosystem with CarPlay and Android Auto. We could see a shift where that gets increasingly pushed down to the actual car operating system itself.
That's a great idea. So for any fuel retailers to move to that state, what you described, with all the hundreds of sites they have, where do you practically start if you want to break out the fragmentation and move forward to the unified, orchestrated payments estate?
It's a really good question. And there is no easy answer, right? One, it's going to really vary between majors in size, et cetera. But if I think about the fuel and convenience retail payments value chain across 3 buckets, right? The first one being the forecourt, which you've talked extensively about, everything that's happening on site, all that complexity. There's a layer behind that, which we typically call above site, which is everything that connects that forecourt, that site to the outside world, right? Maybe it's to the corporate infrastructure, maybe it's to third-party vendors, right? There's this middle bucket here. And then there's the vendors on the right side, right? In the payments world, these are often long-term acquiring payment processing contracts, right? Where they're getting payment processing services. We've talked about the forecourt a lot today, right? Modernization there is a really long-term transformation effort, right? For all of the reasons we talked about today. And unfortunately, it goes way beyond payments. It's really hard to just solve the payment problem at the forecourt and leave everything else there because of the way everything is interconnected. At the vendor level, let's skip ahead to the right side. From my observation working with fuel and convenience retail majors, they've spent a lot of years and decades even really optimizing these contracts to really get every bit they can out of them, both from a price and a KPI service level perspective. So they've really done their diligence, their work to get those acquiring contract optimized. Yes, there's a little more we could do there. You could make them global. You could be doing additional things there. You could maybe eke out a few more cents like we do every negotiation period. But you've really done the most of your work there, right? You've done what you can. So this middle layer, this is really where we believe there's an opportunity, right? I don't want to say that most fuel and convenience retailers ignore this layer, but I think a lot underestimate the value of this layer. And the reason is usually pretty simple. The acquirer technically tends to own those payment terminals sitting at the forecourt, right? Those outdoor payment terminals that are on the forecourt have keys that are injected by that acquirer, that payment processor. So they, by nature, skip this middle level. But we have seen fuel and convenience retailers start to look at that level, examine it really carefully, and see if there's a solution, whether it's a payment gateway, payment orchestration provider, or something by another name that could potentially solve that area. And we do believe that's where you could start, right? That's the lower effort area where it's reasonable to start finding optimization. And if you can implement something at that layer, you can start to be making payment decisions and start to be bringing in those value-added services. You could be doing customer identification. There's just a wealth of things you could be doing. Fraud, checking. We know that at fuel and convenience retailers, there's a huge problem with card testing where skimmers come at 3 a.m. and test a bunch of cards one after another, something you could identify at that level potentially and shut down. prevent yourself from getting in the news about that. So we really do believe that's the level to be focusing on and start before you, and then obviously continue the efforts on both other sides of the coin.
Sure. And then fuel and forecourt and convenience, I always describe it as the unsexy part of shopping, right? Because it's very hard to move it away to e-com space, right? I still do all of my foot shopping face to face. I'm not sending my car to refuel it itself. It was very similar to in-person payments. I described it to somebody recently as the ugly child of payments, and yet, according to whichever stats you look, I think it's 60 to 80% of payments are still happening in person. And I agree with your take on starting with the middle layer, starting small, actually make some improvements, and then moving to the perfect state, rather than maybe thinking about a perfect state and then getting despondent because it's a long journey. And I guess it's a continuous journey.
And we've seen fuel retailers with 10 plus acquiring contracts, and it's just really hard to affect change across all of those contracts at once. And you need that capability in a centralized way. You need that centralization, right? As much as we could potentially introduce a single point of failure, but it does give you one anchor point to be developing and innovating around. One example of something you could do that in that layer is really customer identification. We talked about the problem earlier. 60% of visitors to these fuel and convenience retailers go unidentified. We know who they are in the payments world. We 100% know who they are as soon as they swipe, tap, or dip that card. So could we at that layer be identifying those customers and feeding that information into whatever system it needs to be, a CRM or another system? Absolutely. That's a use case we've seen.
What's the typical reaction, Chris, from fuel retailers when you talk about this stuff, certainly around the identification piece?
They all want to get to this holy grail. I think they're all working on those three layers to figure out which one is the one that gives them there. And I do think there can sometimes be a misperception that right side of the coin, those acquirers will say, we have all these solutions for you, just give us time. And sometimes that time turns into longer than anticipated, right? Those roadmaps get stretched and they tend to be waiting because naturally you want to do something that doesn't require transformation, right? So if your current vendor comes to you and says, I'm going to have that capability for you, just give me time, they have the inclination to wait, and that's very natural, right? But in a market like the US, where fuel and convenience retail is very competitive, very price sensitive, and Victor, you said it well earlier, right? You really want something that drives somebody like a Nathan to get to my site versus another site. You really need to be able to solve that problem. You really need to be solving this problem today, right? You shouldn't be waiting for a vendor, because this is going to drive competitive differences, right? The ability to offer me the sandwich because I like sandwiches, or the coffee because I like coffee, is going to be huge, and it's going to really drive store visits that you could not do otherwise.
I think my kind of observation is, in speaking to retailers and fuel providers, is maybe not trying to boil the ocean. There's this appetite to try to fix absolutely everything, and there are so many different smaller steps that anyone can take that will improve the customer experience. And I guess it all boils down to customer experience. As Nathan, you mentioned yourself, you don't get a customer experience or great customer experience, so your choice is then to go to whichever is closest or whichever is en route. And if you could develop a loyalty in that aspect with a fuel retailer, then they could have a great customer for life. And this is one of the strategies of gaining a customer, and then increasing the wallet share of your spend, being more than just a place that you go and refuel, place that is more of a destination rather than necessity. It's looking at the technology, and I think looking at e-commerce versus card present. E-commerce leapfrogged so much because they could start fresh, where it's more difficult to do it in card present environment. So how do you evolve rather than try to design the perfect system that we will change anyway in 3 months' time?
Victor, I love the phrase boil the ocean, because I think so many of my customers, my clients try to do that, right? To say, I'm not going to try anything because I know what's out there doesn't work. And I think one thing we've learned in payments over the past few years is that it's not what it was 20 years ago, where it's essentially a bank producing product that is used for payments. We now have a lot of tech-led, product-led organizations out there innovating at a rate it's frankly hard to keep up with. If you watch product announcements from any of these next-gen payment companies, they release hundreds of features at each launch cycle, right? And so even if you did an RFP 18 months ago or 12 months ago, that information is outdated. And one of the challenges we have in payments is the fact that it's moving so quickly. I think of payments as almost a bifurcated market. In some ways, it's stayed the same. If I'm a consumer, I still pay with my credit card. Sometimes I tap, sometimes I don't. I feel like I've done things the same. But at the same time, it's changed really dramatically. The players have changed, the market's changed, the opportunities changed, the level of friction has changed. You mentioned e-commerce, completely different than it was, right? How many of us click on a buy button out of the box now or use a wallet when we were using cards just a couple of years ago? I do encourage customers to think small. You said it all. You're probably right. There is rarely a solution in payments that fits 100% of your use case, 100% of your sites, 100% of your challenges or channels. But you've got to start somewhere, right? And do that proof of concept. Think from the omni-channel perspective. See if there's a way you can solve it small and start to solve it and find solutions. Look at new vendors, et cetera. Because doing nothing is not an option. And you said it very well, Victor. This is a very competitive market. It will be easy to fall behind once that Uber moment happens. There's going to be a huge competitive advantage created by the first fuel and convenience retailer to really get this right.
When I first started in payments 20 years ago, you had probably 5 players out there or 5 big players. And now, you've definitely run out of fingers on your hands. You're talking hundreds, right? And that is, I guess, a blessing, but also a curse, because then all of a sudden, how do you decide which players to engage with? And I think then becomes a question of niche, specialty, who's the right person for you, and choosing the right vendor, but the right vendor now might not be the right vendor for the future. But ultimately, there isn't a silver bullet solution. And the shameless plug for us, obviously, on our side, when it comes to payment orchestration, we facilitate connecting to all the different players within the ecosystem. This is our role to make sure that we could future-proof the experience in terms of hardware vendors, software vendors, card acquirers, etc. But even for us, it's difficult to foresee who's the right person for the specific use case. So for individual provider, it's just I can see why there is this paralysis by analysis moment, and they maybe then don't do anything and they fall behind even further. But yeah, I'm still waiting for the Uber moment for the forecourt and convenience. There's a lot of stuff we talked about, the good things that are happening, that what we would like to see. What would be the one thing that you will remove from the fuel or retail fuel experience?
Yeah, for me, it's one, when I'm pumping gas, my hands get inevitably at least a few globs of fuel on them. So I would prefer it to be completely hands-free, where I don't have to touch my wallet or my phone or anything. And one of the fundamental issues with this whole mobile app at fuel pump thing that I've seen over the years is they spent years telling us not to use our phones at the pump. And then they turned around and said, please use your phones at the pump. So I'm still confused. I still don't know if I'm allowed to pull out my phone at the pump or not. And I don't really want to, because my hands have a few drops of fuel on them anyway. But the thing I would like to remove is the ability to enter my phone number at the grocery store or at the fuel retailer. I tap my card, you know who I am. That should be enough. Why can't they identify me? We have the data, we have the systems, we have the interconnectivity in a lot of cases. So why can I not enroll my card into their system so that as soon as I tap it, they know who I am and they automatically enroll me? That would be great. Apple Pay has had that capability since day maybe not day one, but certainly the first launch after that. We've never seen it happen, at least to be able to handle in one tap, produce both cards. So I would love to see that one step removed from the friction of most multi-lane retailers and fuel and convenience retailers. I think that would save us all valuable seconds in our day.
What would be the practical steps from a technical level? And you might not have been involved in the technical implementation of this stuff. Maybe it's more of the advisory side. Do you have any insights into what they would need to do to get there?
Yeah, the reason why most companies haven't done this is really around privacy and the different regulations and how you get enough opt-in to be able to do that. I think the first part starts with a very sound legal analysis of all the considerations around linking those two things together. Practically speaking, from at least my advisory experience, it's really linking the data you're getting from your various payment parties to your customer systems, right? And being able to identify customers that way. The practical reason, in addition to legal, is really timing. Some of that data is just not coming through quickly enough to get the data you need to identify that customer in real time. And so many systems are batch-based, particularly in fuel and convenience retail, where settlement's happening at the end of the day. They're just not able to make decisions quickly enough to be able to react to this information and say, okay, this is thing. And even if you were to implement it today, there's a huge fear of what the latency would be like to do that. And say you're doing 3 or 4 calls back and forth to a cloud system for that transaction where you weren't before. I am starting to see one innovation I saw recently while I was on a trip was the pump asked me, do I want my receipt while I was pumping rather than at the end of the transaction? I think the conclusion to all fuel and retail transactions is always, do you want that receipt? No. For me, it's always a no, but I have to hang around because I want to make sure I press that no. So doing that while I'm pumping, that saved me valuable seconds. So like that with the loyalty program, I think you could be doing some of those things, some of the latency causing things during the transaction, rather than having to wait during the authorization step before customers are pumping, right? And think creatively about how to streamline that customer journey.
We are very fortunate to have people like Chris Dickey sharing their insights. And for everyone listening to the latest episode of the Fragmented Forecourts series, you are welcome to pop over to aevi.com/fragmented forecourts. There, you will find more deep dives into the realities of fuel retail, the fragmentation, customer identification, loyalty, payments, the hardware, and the future of the connected forecourt. So head over to aevi.com/fragmented forecourt. Alternatively, just hit subscribe and you'll be notified when a new episode lands. Thanks again for listening, thanks for all the support, and we'll see you very soon.